The television screen went black right in the middle of the evening news. I did not reach for the remote. I just looked up at my son-in-law Darius, who was standing over me in a custom suit I had essentially paid for. He dropped a thick legal document onto my glass coffee table and smiled. 30 minutes to pack, Evelyn, he said. You are trespassing in my house. My own daughter Chloe stood by the wet bar, sipping expensive wine and staring at the floor. I stood up, took my keys, and walked out. But what they did not know was that my grandson was waiting by the door, and the small drive he slipped into my coat pocket was about to burn their entire lives to the ground. My name is Evelyn Sterling. I am 68 years old, and I am the co-founder of Sterling Freight and Logistics. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that family loyalty should mean something, and that greed always comes with a price. The silence in my living room was heavy enough to choke on. I sat on the white leather sofa in the center of the $4 million Buckhead mansion my late husband and I had built from nothing. I looked down at the document Darius had thrown onto the glass table. The heavy, crisp paper bore the official seal of the county. Right at the top, in bold black letters, were the words, "Quitclaim Deed." It took my brain exactly 3 seconds to process what I was looking at. My signature was at the bottom. It was not forged. It was completely genuine. The memory hit me like a physical blow. 1 month earlier, Darius had come to my office at the freight headquarters. He paced around sweating and talking fast about new federal inheritance rules, corporate restructuring, and a temporary plan to protect the family assets. Chloe stood beside him holding my hand and telling me that her husband was only trying to preserve what her father had built. I had been exhausted from supply chain delays, a fleet expansion, and 3 consecutive nights with almost no sleep. I signed the transfer packet without giving every entity name the scrutiny I normally demanded. I understood that I was authorizing a restructuring. I did not understand that Darius intended to use those signatures as permission to seize my home and claim control over a company he barely understood. Darius laughed, a dry, harsh sound that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "The 30-minute clock is ticking, Evelyn," he said, adjusting his silk tie. "You need to gather your personal toiletries and whatever clothes fit into 2 bags. I have a crew coming tomorrow morning to change the locks and stage the house for immediate listing. The holding company is already being liquidated. You do not own a single brick of this estate or a single truck in that fleet." I turned my gaze away from Darius and looked at Chloe, my biological daughter. The child I had carried for 9 months. The girl whose private school tuition I had paid for by working 18-hour days, managing dispatch routes and balancing corporate ledgers, while my husband drove 18-wheelers across the country. Chloe was standing by the marble wet bar, pouring herself a glass of $200 Pinot Noir. Her hands were manicured, her hair perfectly styled, but she refused to look at me. "Look at me, Chloe," I said. My voice did not shake. It was perfectly level, cold, and precise. "Are you really going to stand there and watch your husband throw your mother out onto the street?" Chloe finally lifted her head, but her eyes darted nervously around the room. "Mom, do not make this harder than it has to be," she murmured, taking a long sip of her wine. "You are getting older. You cannot handle the stress of the corporate world anymore. Darius knows how to navigate the modern market. We are just streamlining things. We will set you up in a nice luxury retirement community. It is for your own good." It is for your own good. The sheer audacity of the lie hung in the air. I did not scream. I did not cry. Crying is a luxury for people who have the time to be victims, and I stopped being a victim 40 years ago. Instead of panicking, I did what I have always done in business. I observed my opponent. I looked closely at Darius. He was trying to project the image of a victorious king taking over his kingdom, but the cracks in his facade were glaring. Despite the cool air conditioning in the mansion, a thick bead of sweat was rolling down his temple. He kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His left hand, resting against his tailored trousers, was trembling. He kept glancing at the glowing screen of his smartwatch every few seconds. A man who has just secured generational wealth does not sweat like a pig in a slaughterhouse. A man who has just won the lottery does not check his watch like a bomb is about to go off. Darius was not acting out of pure ambition. He was acting out of pure terror. He was desperate for liquidity. He needed to sell my house and my company immediately. He needed cash, and he needed it faster than a normal corporate transition would allow. I was cornered by something massive, and he had dragged my daughter right into the trap with him. I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles out of my custom wool trousers. I walked over to the entryway table where my heavy brass house keys sat in a crystal bowl. I picked them up, feeling the familiar weight in my palm. Darius stood a few feet away, holding his half-empty glass of champagne, a smug, triumphant grin plastered across his sweating face. I walked right up to him. I looked him dead in the eyes and dropped my keys directly into his champagne glass. The heavy metal splashed the expensive liquor over the rim and onto his expensive silk tie. He stepped back, cursing and wiping at his chest, but I was already turning away. I looked at Chloe one last time. "You made your bed, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I truly hope you survive sleeping in it." I did not wait for her response. I grabbed my long coat from the rack and pushed open the heavy oak front doors, stepping out into the biting cold of the Atlanta night. The driveway was dark except for the security lights illuminating Darius' leased luxury car. I walked down the stone steps, my mind already calculating my next 10 moves. I needed to freeze the business accounts. I needed to call my emergency legal contact. I needed to figure out what kind of trouble Darius was actually in. As I reached the bottom step, a shadow moved near the side of the garage. It was Tariq, my 21-year-old grandson, and Chloe's son from her first marriage. Tariq was a junior at Morehouse College studying cybersecurity and forensic accounting. He was brilliant, quiet, and far more observant than anyone in that house realized. He had never trusted the polished stories Darius told about easy money and modern finance. Tariq walked toward me holding a black plastic trash bag, pretending he was just taking out the garbage. As he brushed past me in the dark, his shoulder bumped against mine. I felt his hand slip smoothly into the deep pocket of my coat. I kept my face completely blank, looking straight ahead. Tariq leaned in close, pretending to adjust his grip on the trash bag. His voice was barely a breath in the cold air. "Do not go to the bank, Grandma," he whispered, fast and urgent. "Do not use your regular credit cards. I have been watching his network for weeks. He is in deep. The drive in your pocket has everything. Use the burner phone to call me when you are safe. Wait for my signal." Before I could even nod, Tariq walked away, heading toward the trash bins at the end of the driveway, acting like nothing had happened. I slipped my hand into my coat pocket. My fingers wrapped around a small, heavy piece of metal, a thumb drive, and a cheap plastic burner phone. Darius thought he had just evicted a helpless old woman. He thought he had outsmarted a widow who built a regional trucking empire from a single diesel engine. He had no idea that I was walking away with the exact weapon I needed to dismantle his entire existence. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away from the house I owned, leaving my daughter and her husband to celebrate their stolen wealth. They had won the night, but the war had just begun. I drove in silence for 30 minutes, heading toward a secure hotel downtown where I kept a corporate suite under a dummy corporation name. My mind was racing, putting the pieces together. Darius was trembling. Tariq had stolen his data. The rush to liquidate the company. Someone was hunting my son-in-law, and whatever he owed them, it was enough to make him betray his own family to pay the debt. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the hotel. I did not use my personal name to check in. I used the burner phone Tariq gave me to send a single text message to my private attorney. The message simply said, "We are at war." I sat on the edge of the hotel bed in the dark room, staring at the small encrypted flash drive resting in the palm of my hand. Tomorrow morning, Darius would try to list my home. He would try to sell off my freight contracts. He would try to erase my legacy. But tomorrow morning, I was going to plug this drive into a computer and find out exactly what kind of monster had his claws around my sons-in-law's neck. I was going to find out exactly how much debt he was hiding, and then I was going to let him drown in it. As I drove away, I remembered the first time Chloe brought Darius to Sunday dinner. He arrived in a charcoal suit carrying flowers for me and a bottle of bourbon for Charles. He listened carefully while my husband described how we had built Sterling Freight from one used tractor and a rented loading yard. Darius asked intelligent questions about operating margins, fuel hedges, and warehouse leases. Charles admired his confidence. I admired the way Chloe smiled when he entered a room. At the time, I mistook performance for character. Darius did not begin by demanding control. He began by making himself useful. He volunteered to review insurance renewals. He introduced us to a tax consultant. He created elegant presentations that made ordinary refinancing plans sound revolutionary. Every favor was small enough to appear harmless. Every password he requested was explained as convenience. By the time Charles died after a brief illness, Darius had positioned himself close to every weak point grief had created in our family. Chloe changed more slowly. She had grown up watching her father and me work 18-hour days, but she remembered the finished mansion more clearly than the rented trailer where our first dispatch desk had stood. She loved the rewards of the company without respecting the discipline that produced them. Darius fed that weakness. He told her she had been denied her rightful influence. He made patience sound like humiliation, and inheritance sound like a debt I owed immediately. Tariq noticed what the adults ignored. During school breaks, he worked in our information technology department and learned the architecture of our internal systems. Months before my eviction, he found repeated login attempts from devices used by Darius against archived corporate folders. He also noticed encrypted finance applications appearing on the home network at impossible hours. Tariq did not have enough evidence to accuse his stepfather, but he began preserving access logs and backup records from systems he was authorized to maintain. The thumb drive in my pocket contained that history, along with a secure key that would help him compare it against whatever Darius did next. That was why he warned me not to visit a bank or use my ordinary cards. He understood that Darius would track every predictable move. More important, he understood that the theft of my house was probably not the beginning of the plan. It was the moment a much larger plan had finally become visible. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my secure penthouse suite at the St. Regis, watching the early morning sun reflect off the Atlanta skyline. A rapid knock broke the stillness. I opened the door and found Tariq in the hallway with his silver laptop tucked under his arm. His face was drawn tight with exhaustion and focus. I locked the door behind him, pulled the encrypted drive from my coat pocket, and placed it in his palm. He sat at the mahogany table and connected it to an isolated computer that had never touched the hotel network. The drive did not contain an impossible overnight theft of every account Darius owned. It held months of router logs, shared server backups, and security alerts Tariq had lawfully preserved while helping maintain the household systems. During the night, he compared those records with a synchronized backup from a family tablet Darius had carelessly left connected to the home cloud. The result was a map of hidden folders, secret accounts, and communications that Darius believed no one else could see. We were looking at a live broadcast from the hidden security camera I had installed in the mansion kitchen 3 years ago. Darius was standing at my custom marble island drinking a double espresso. He was wearing a fresh silk robe, acting as though he had just conquered the entire world. Chloe, my biological daughter, was sitting on a velvet bar stool flipping aimlessly through a luxury real estate magazine. She looked completely detached from the brutal reality of what she had allowed to happen the night before. I watched her perfectly manicured hands turn the glossy pages and felt a cold void where my maternal sympathy used to be. The heavy chime of the front doorbell echoed through the audio feed. Darius set his espresso cup down with a smug, triumphant smile. He proudly announced to Chloe that the high-end real estate broker had arrived. He was expecting an aggressive cash appraisal so he could list my home by noon today. I watched through the foyer camera as Darius swaggered down the hallway, pulling open the heavy oak doors with absolute arrogance. But the man standing on my front porch was not a luxury real estate broker. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a cheap gray suit, holding a thick manila envelope in his hands. The security microphone picked up the brief exchange perfectly. The man asked if he was speaking to Darius Vance. Darius puffed out his chest and proudly confirmed that he was indeed the new sole owner of the property. The man in the suit did not smile or offer congratulations. He simply shoved the heavy envelope directly into Darius' chest. "Notice of impending action," the man said flatly before turning on his heel and walking back down the long stone driveway. I watched my son-in-law stumble backward into the grand foyer. The smug arrogance melted off his face in a matter of seconds. He tore open the heavy envelope with trembling fingers and began frantically reading the first page. Even through the compressed video feed, I could see the color drain completely from his cheeks. His breathing turned shallow and rapid. He dropped the envelope onto the marble floor, clutching his chest as if he were experiencing a massive heart attack. Chloe ran into the hallway, demanding to know what was wrong, but Darius could not even form a coherent sentence. He just pushed past her and bolted up the grand staircase, leaving the legal documents scattered across the floor. I looked away from the video feed and asked Tariq what the process server had delivered. He opened a folder containing synchronized notices and public case records. "We do not need the physical copy, Grandma," he said. The same notice was sent electronically to the controlling member of the entity Darius claimed yesterday. Whatever he thought he stole came with something he did not expect. My grandson opened a hidden folder Darius had buried deep inside an offshore cloud storage drive. The documents populating the screen were not related to my logistics company or my local real estate holdings. They were foreign bank statements, margin call notices, and highly encrypted chat logs. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the staggering numbers flashing across the screen. Darius had not just made a few bad investments in the stock market. He had blindly walked into a financial slaughterhouse. Over the past 8 months, he had been secretly funneling millions of dollars into a highly leveraged cryptocurrency scheme, hoping to strike it rich without doing any actual work. But he did not use a legitimate trading platform or secure bank loans. The decrypted chat logs showed he had borrowed the massive amount of capital from an illegal offshore syndicate operating out of the Cayman Islands. It was a ruthless cartel masquerading as a venture capital firm. Tariq highlighted a specific ledger at the bottom of the screen. Darius had lost exactly $8 million in a massive, unpredicted market crash last week. The money was completely gone, vanished into the digital ether without a single trace. But the syndicate did not care about market fluctuations or bad luck. They only cared about recovering their money with interest. A terrible cold chill washed over me as Tariq opened the most recent messages from the syndicate fixer. The language was not couched in polite corporate terms. It was brutal, violent, and direct. The messages detailed exactly what would happen to Darius and Chloe if the $8 million was not wired to their offshore account within 10 days. They knew exactly where he lived. They knew his daily routine. They promised to dismantle him piece by piece and burn his life to the ground. Darius was a dead man walking. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with absolute clarity. This hostile takeover was never about inheritance taxes. This was never about Chloe genuinely thinking I was too old to run the company. Darius was drowning in blood debt. He needed massive liquid capital immediately to save his own miserable life. He orchestrated the eviction and the theft of my estate because my property and my freight company were the only assets large enough to cover an $8 million cartel bounty. He traded his mother-in-law for his survival. He manipulated my daughter into helping him steal my life work just so he could sell it off to ruthless criminals in a desperate bid to stay breathing. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the dark, bitter taste ground my rising anger. I had spent 40 years negotiating with cutthroat corporate executives and ruthless union bosses, but I had never looked into the eyes of a man cowardly enough to sell his family to a cartel. Tariq kept digging through the financial routing numbers and corporate drafts. He pointed to a specific legal document Darius had prepared late last night, immediately after he threw me out of the house. "Look at this, Grandma," Tariq said, his jaw tight with pure disgust. "He already drew up the liquidation paperwork for your logistics company. He intends to sell your entire commercial trucking fleet to a shady salvage buyer for pennies on the dollar. I is ready to destroy 4 decades of your hard work just to get the cash by Friday." I stared at the forged signatures on the digital documents. Darius had been incredibly busy while I was driving to the hotel. He truly believed he held all the winning cards. He believed the quitclaim deed gave him absolute, uncontested authority to tear apart my empire and sell it for scrap. But he did not know about the massive structural traps my late husband and I had built deep into the legal foundation of that holding company. Before I could explain my countermeasure to Tariq, the laptop emitted a sharp, high-pitched ping. The family tablet backup had synchronized a new message from Darius' account. Because he had left the device connected to the shared household cloud, the message appeared on our isolated screen at the same time it appeared on his phone. "A new message just synchronized," Tariq whispered, leaning closer to the monitor. "He is writing to the syndicate fixer right now." We watched the words appear letter by letter as Darius typed them out in his frantic, terrified state. The message read, "The old lady is out of the house and I have full legal control of the primary assets. I am freezing all her personal bank accounts right now so she cannot hire a defense attorney or fight the transfer." I felt my jaw clench. Freezing my accounts was a standard corporate warfare tactic, but executing it against an elderly family member required a special kind of malice. Darius wanted to leave me entirely destitute, unable to fight back or even buy a meal. He wanted to break my spirit before I could even reach a courtroom. The typing on the screen continued. We watched the cursor blink rapidly as Darius composed the second half of his message to the cartel. The words that followed proved exactly how far my son-in-law was willing to go to save his own skin. "We are throwing her in a psychiatric ward by Friday," Darius typed, his desperation bleeding through the screen. "I paid a private doctor to sign the involuntary medical hold paperwork. Once she is legally declared incompetent and locked away, I will liquidate the freight company and wire the full $8 million to your account. Give me until Friday and you will have your money." The message sent. The digital delivery receipt flashed on the screen, confirming the cartel had received his promise. Tariq slowly turned his head to look at me. His young face was a mixture of absolute shock and rising, furious anger. "Grandma," he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief, "they are not just trying to steal the money in the house. They are going to lock you in an asylum. They are going to drug you and wipe you completely off the map." I did not flinch. I looked at the glowing letters on the computer monitor, detailing my impending doom. Darius thought he was playing chess with a frail old widow who did not understand the modern world. He thought financial starvation and a corrupt psychiatric hold would force me into quiet submission. He thought I would fade away in a padded room while he sold the empire I built with my bare hands. I stood up from the heavy wooden table and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the bustling Atlanta streets below. I opened my leather purse, bypassed my regular wallet, and reached into a hidden zipper compartment sewn deep into the lining. I pulled out a solid titanium credit card that Darius knew absolutely nothing about. "Let him freeze the public accounts," I said, my voice carrying the unshakable weight of 40 years of corporate survival. "Let him think I am starving and helpless. We are going to a very exclusive country club luncheon this afternoon, Tariq. It is time to show your stepfather that you cannot trap a woman who built the cage." Tariq's fingers flew across the keyboard. He pulled up a complex routing interface that showed the live status of my banking portfolio. I leaned over his shoulder, watching the screen. A series of bright red alerts cascaded down the right side of the monitor. The digital assault had officially begun. Darius was executing his threat. I watched the numbers on my primary checking account turn gray. A restriction code flashed across the center of the screen. The joint savings account I had maintained for 30 years flipped to a locked status. Even the emergency credit lines attached to my personal Social Security number vanished from the active roster one by one. Darius was moving with reckless speed. He was systematically severing my financial arteries, attempting to starve me out of the game before the lunch hour even arrived. I stepped away from the table and walked toward the bedroom closet. I pulled out a tailored crimson blazer and a string of vintage pearls. I stood in front of the tall vanity mirror and fastened the pearls around my neck. I adjusted my collar, completely unbothered by the red warnings flashing on the computer screen behind me. Tariq spun around in his chair, looking genuinely terrified. He informed me that the personal funds were entirely inaccessible. He warned me that if I tried to buy so much as a cup of coffee, my card would decline and trigger a location alert sent directly to Darius. I picked up my favorite burgundy leather handbag from the bed and checked the golden clasp. I told my grandson to keep monitoring the cartel communications while I attended to my social calendar. Tariq looked at me like I had lost my mind. He reminded me that I had no working credit cards and a hostile son-in-law actively hunting my location. I simply smiled. I told him that a woman does not build a regional logistics empire without learning how to hide a few spare tires. I walked out of the hotel suite, leaving him to monitor the code. The valet brought my town car around to the front drive, and I tipped him with a crisp bill from my coat pocket. I drove through the bustling Atlanta morning traffic, heading straight toward the Piedmont Driving Club. The club was a heavily guarded sanctuary of old money and quiet influence. Valets rushed forward to open the heavy glass doors as I pulled up to the grand entrance. The scent of roasted prime rib and fresh magnolias filled the expansive dining hall. I was hosting a private charity luncheon for 10 of the most influential black female executives in the city. We sat at a long, polished mahogany table overlooking the manicured green slopes of the golf course. Crystal goblets clinked as we discussed philanthropic endowments and upcoming corporate board appointments. The bill for this particular gathering would easily exceed $3,000. That was exactly why I chose this location. I knew Darius had placed a tracking module on my vehicle months ago. I wanted him to find me. I wanted him to spring his trap in front of the most powerful gossips in the state. The main doors of the dining hall swung open with unnecessary violent force. The heavy oak groaned, drawing the irritated attention of the surrounding tables. Chloe walked into the room. She was wearing a beige trench coat and an expression of frantic manufactured terror. She scanned the dining room until her eyes locked onto my table. She did not walk towards me, she practically ran. Her heels clicked sharply against the polished marble floors, echoing loudly through the quiet, elegant space. The gentle hum of classical background music and polite conversation ground to a sudden halt. Chloe stopped right next to my chair, breathing heavily as if she had just sprinted a marathon. She placed her manicured hand on my shoulder and squeezed it tight. The fake tears welling in her eyes were truly a marvel of modern acting. "Mom," she cried out, her voice pitched loud enough to carry to the farthest corners of the room. "Oh, thank goodness I found you. You wandered off again. We have been looking everywhere for you since breakfast." The women at my table stopped eating. They lowered their forks and exchanged incredibly uncomfortable glances. I kept my face entirely neutral. I gently patted my mouth with a linen napkin and asked my daughter why she was interrupting a private business function. Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sob. She dropped to her knees beside my chair, resting her head against my arm. "Mom, please stop doing this," she pleaded, raising her voice even louder for the audience. "You know you are not supposed to be driving anymore. The doctor warned us about these episodes. You are getting confused. You are forgetting things. You do not even remember that your bank accounts were frozen this morning because of your reckless spending." The silence in the dining room became absolutely suffocating. A few waiters stopped dead in their tracks, holding trays of food. I saw the club manager approaching from the main lobby, looking deeply apologetic and terribly embarrassed. Chloe looked up at the ladies sitting at my table. She offered them a tragic, tear-stained smile. "I am so sorry for the disruption," she told them, wiping her cheeks. "My mother is suffering from advanced cognitive decline. She keeps forgetting her personal identification numbers and making up imaginary meetings. The bank had to lock her cards this morning to protect her from herself. She cannot pay for this meal." The club manager arrived at our table. He cleared his throat, holding a black leather check presenter in his hands. He looked down at me with deep pity. "Mrs. Sterling," he murmured softly, "I am terribly sorry to interrupt this lovely lunch, but there seems to be an issue with your account on file. The financial institution flagged the pre-authorization. Perhaps your daughter could assist with the balance today." Chloe stood up, brushing the dust off her trench coat. She looked down at me with absolute victory shining in her eyes. "I will handle the bill," she told the manager. Then she turned her gaze back to me. Her voice dripped with poisonous honey. "Come on, Mom," she coaxed, reaching down to grab my arm. "Let us go pay the nice man, and then we are going to take you to that beautiful care facility we toured last week. The one with the secure doors, so you cannot wander off and hurt yourself anymore." This was her grand masterpiece. She was using intense public humiliation to break my spirit. She wanted my peers to view me as a tragic, broken shell of a woman. She wanted the rumor mill to confirm that Evelyn Sterling had lost her mind. She thought I would shrink down in my chair, hand over my purse, and let her lead me straight into a psychiatric prison just to escape the judging stares of my friends. I let my hands begin to shake. I let my bottom lip quiver just a fraction of an inch. I looked up at the manager with wide, fearful eyes, playing the part of the confused, helpless widow flawlessly. "I am so sorry," I whispered, my voice fragile and thin. "I must have brought the wrong wallet today. My memory has been so unreliable lately." Chloe smiled a genuine, predatory smile. "It is okay, Mom," she cooed, patting my shoulder again. "Let us just get you out to the car. Darius is waiting in the lobby to help you walk down the steps." I ignored her outstretched hand. I reached down and picked up my burgundy leather handbag from the empty chair beside me. My fingers fumbled clumsily with the main golden clasp. I let out a frustrated little sigh for dramatic effect. Then I slid my thumb down the smooth leather side panel. I pressed firmly against a seamless hidden zipper tucked behind the inner silk lining. The compartment opened silently. I reached deep inside and pulled out a solid metal card. It was not a standard bank issue. It was heavy brushed titanium. It did not bear the name of my logistics company or my personal identity. It was tied to a phantom holding corporation I had established in Delaware 2 decades ago, a financial ghost ship completely disconnected from my Social Security number. Darius and his cartel hackers could never freeze it because they did not even know it existed. My hands stopped shaking instantly. The fragile, helpless posture vanished from my spine. I sat up straight, radiating the absolute unwavering authority of a woman who commanded massive fleets and dominated boardrooms. I handed the heavy titanium card directly to the club manager. "Run this for the entire table," I told him, my voice crisp and commanding. "And please add a $500 gratuity for the unnecessary disturbance." The manager blinked rapidly, taking the heavy metal card. He bowed quickly and rushed back toward the payment terminal. Chloe stood frozen next to my chair. The fake tears stopped flowing immediately. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She stared at the spot where the card had been trying to process how her airtight financial blockade had just evaporated in front of 50 wealthy spectators. The ladies at my table picked up their silver forks. The uncomfortable silence shifted into amused, approving murmurs. They recognized a ruthless power play when they saw one. The club manager returned exactly 90 seconds later, holding a silver tray. He presented the receipt to me with a deeply respectful nod. "The transaction was approved seamlessly, Mrs. Sterling," he announced clearly. "Thank you for your exceptional generosity today." I pulled a custom gold pen from my blazer pocket and signed my name with a smooth, elegant flourish. I placed the receipt back on the tray and slipped the titanium card safely back into the hidden pocket of my handbag. I did not look at Chloe immediately. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, enjoying the crisp, refreshing taste against my tongue. I stood up from my chair, smoothing the front of my tailored blazer. I turned to my daughter, who was now visibly trembling. The arrogant confidence she had carried into the dining room had completely dissolved into pure terror. I stepped close to her, invading her personal space. I leaned in so my lips were just an inch from her ear. "I taught you how to walk, Chloe." I whispered the words, sliding like ice water down her spine. "I taught you how to speak. I taught you how to dress, but I never taught you how to count my money." She stumbled backward, clutching her trench coat tightly around her waist. She looked around the expansive room, realizing that every single influential woman at the table was now watching her with cold, judgmental eyes. Her grand public humiliation tactic had just backfired spectacularly. She turned on her heel and practically jogged out of the dining room, her face burning with deep red shame. I walked out of the club at a very leisurely pace, nodding politely to the waitstaff as I passed the grand columns. Through the massive glass double doors of the lobby, I saw Darius pacing back and forth near the valet stand. He watched Chloe burst through the doors empty-handed and absolutely panicked. I watched his face contort with dark, violent rage as she explained what had just happened inside the dining hall. He glared through the thick glass, locking eyes with me. The brutal realization washed over his features in real time. Financial starvation was a complete failure. He could not drain my resources because he could not find the bottom of my well. I gave him a small, polite wave from inside the lobby. I saw his jaw clench tightly. I saw the desperate, dangerous shift in his posture as he realized his clever little tricks were useless. He pulled out his phone, turning violently away from the building. The subtle games were officially over. He was completely out of time, and he was rapidly running out of options. He realized that if he wanted to take my empire, he was going to have to use brute legal force to drag me into the dark. The leather seats of my town car were quiet as my driver navigated the afternoon traffic back to the St. Regis Hotel. I stared out the tinted window, watching the blur of the Atlanta skyline, but my mind was completely focused on the digital war room waiting for me in my penthouse suite. Darius had just suffered a catastrophic public humiliation at the country club. He had tried to starve me out financially and failed in front of the most powerful women in the state. A desperate man with a bruised ego is dangerous, but a desperate man who owes $8 million to an international cartel is lethal. I knew he would not lick his wounds for long. He was going to escalate. He was going to stop playing financial games and start using physical force. I pushed open the heavy oak doors to my suite. The curtains were tightly drawn, plunging the expansive living room into cool shadows. Tariq was hunched over the polished dining table, completely surrounded by glowing monitors. The quiet hum of the computer processors was the only sound in the room. He did not look up when I walked in. His eyes were locked on a rapidly scrolling wall of encrypted text. The ambient light from the screens cast sharp angles across his face, making him look much older than 21. He no longer looked like a student helping with a family computer problem. The responsibility had forced him into a conflict no 21-year-old should have been asked to manage. "Grandma, you need to see this right now," Tariq said, his voice tight with a terrifying urgency. I set my handbag on the marble counter and walked to his workstation. Tariq highlighted a transfer of $50,000 from one of the hidden offshore accounts into the personal checking account of a local Atlanta physician named Dr. Evans. The state medical board database showed that Evans had been disciplined for fraudulent prescriptions and was practicing under a strict probation agreement. His license remained active, which meant his signature could still trigger a medical response before anyone examined the truth behind it. Tariq opened a newly synchronized email sent from Evans to Darius. It contained a completed Georgia emergency evaluation form designed to initiate an involuntary 72-hour psychiatric hold. My blood ran cold as I read the fabricated assessment. Evans described violent, erratic behavior that had never occurred. He claimed I suffered from rapid cognitive decline, paranoid delusions, and an immediate risk of harm. The document also named Darius as the family contact authorized to direct the private transport company. "They are coming for you," Tariq said, his fingers flying across the keyboard to trace the dispatch orders. Darius just confirmed a private medical transport company. They are sending a secure ambulance to the hotel lobby tomorrow at 6 in the morning. He ordered the paramedics to use heavy chemical restraints the moment they walk through your door. He told them you would be combative. The sheer brutality of the legal maneuver was breathtaking. Once those paramedics injected me with a heavy sedative and strapped me to a gurney, I would vanish into the system. The 72-hour hold would give Darius temporary conservatorship over my entire estate. I would wake up in a locked psychiatric ward, stripped of my communication devices, my legal rights, and my dignity. I would be silenced, and Darius would have exactly enough time to liquidate my logistics company and wire the $8 million to his cartel creditors before the weekend. He was going to bury me alive to save his own skin. "We need to pack right now," Tariq said, standing up from his chair and grabbing his jacket. "We have to move you to a different hotel. We can hide you in a property under my name. We have to leave before they track this location." I placed my hand firmly on his shoulder, pushing him back down into his seat. "We are not running, Tariq," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. "A queen does not flee her own castle just because the court jester bought a sword." I looked at the digital copy of the psychiatric hold. Darius had played his final card. Now it was time to play mine. Before I could instruct Tariq to block the ambulance dispatch, the secondary monitor on his desk emitted a strange, high-pitched pinging sound. Tariq frowned, staring at a network traffic analyzer he had running in the background. The green lines on the graph were spiking erratically. Someone was piggybacking on the secure hotel wireless network. Tariq raised his hand, gesturing for absolute silence. He pulled a small black device from his backpack. It was a radio frequency scanner designed to detect active transmission signals. He flipped the switch, and the device immediately began to emit a low clicking sound. Tariq stood up and slowly walked toward the center of the living room. As he moved closer to the velvet curtains, the clicking grew faster. He swept the device past the television, past the mahogany credenza, and up toward the vaulted ceiling. The scanner began to shriek as he pointed it directly at the circular smoke detector mounted above the seating area. Tariq pulled a small flashlight from his pocket and shined the beam directly into the plastic vents of the smoke alarm. Deep inside the casing, hidden perfectly in the shadows, was the unmistakable glint of a microscopic glass lens. Next to the lens was a tiny red light transmitting a steady, continuous pulse. Tariq pulled out his notepad and quickly scribbled a message, sliding it across the table to me. The paper read, "Darius bribed the hotel concierge. He planted a live streaming camera while we were out at the country club. He is watching us right now. He is waiting for you to do something crazy, so he has video proof for the psychiatric hold." Tariq reached into his pocket to grab a pocket knife, ready to stand on a chair and cut the wires to the hidden camera. I grabbed his wrist, stopping him instantly. My grip was like iron. I took the pen from his hand and wrote a single sentence beneath his message. "We feed the animal until his stomach bursts." I looked up at the smoke detector. Darius wanted a performance. He wanted a delusional, paranoid old woman terrified of losing her mind. I was going to give him a masterpiece that would win me an Academy Award. I stepped back from the table and deliberately messed up the collar of my tailored blazer. I ran my hands through my perfectly styled hair, making it look frantic and disheveled. I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I let a visible, violent tremor take over my hands. I stumbled toward the living room sofa, knocking a decorative book off the coffee table. I fell onto the cushions, burying my face in my hands, letting out a loud, panicked sob. Tariq stood in the corner, perfectly still, watching my performance with wide, astonished eyes. I pulled my burner phone from my pocket, holding it up to my ear with shaking fingers. I dialed a completely random, disconnected number and waited a few seconds before launching into my frantic monologue. "Marcus," I cried out, my voice trembling with manufactured terror. "Marcus, please, you have to listen to me. They are trying to take the house. Darius is trying to sell the Buckhead estate. You have to get the crew together right now." I paused, pretending the imaginary person on the other end of the line was asking me a question. "No, you do not understand," I sobbed louder, clutching my chest. Charles never told the IRS about the surplus capital. Before he died, he pulled the funds from the commercial fleet. He bought gold Marcus, solid, untraceable gold bullion, $10 million worth. I stood up, pacing the floor beneath the hidden camera, acting like a woman completely losing her grip on reality. I rambled about federal tax audits and imaginary corporate spies. I painted a flawless, terrifying picture of a paranoid husband hiding his wealth from the government. "I'm buried it under the wine cellar," I whispered loudly, staring wildly around the room. Charles encased $10 million of solid gold bullion directly beneath the imported Italian marble of the basement wine cellar. He poured 3 feet of reinforced industrial concrete right over the crates so the federal agents would never find it. "Marcus, you have to bring the industrial jackhammers. If Darius sells the property, the new owners will find the gold. We have to tear up the basement floor tonight before the real estate brokers arrive. Please, Marcus, help me dig it up." I let out one final exhausted sob, dropped the burner phone onto the carpet, and curled myself into a tight ball on the sofa, rocking back and forth. The silence in the penthouse was thick and electric. I stayed in character for 5 agonizing minutes, keeping my face buried in my hands. Finally, Tariq walked to the dining table and checked the isolated monitoring laptop. I slowly lifted my head, wiping the fake tears from my cheeks. I stood up, smoothed out my blazer, and walked calmly over to the monitors. We watched the synchronized message feed from the family tablet. The new activity told us exactly how well my performance had worked. Darius was sitting in his luxury car, staring at the live video stream from our hotel room. The greed radiating from his text logs was almost radioactive. He was a desperate man drowning in $8 million of cartel debt. The mere mention of $10 million in untraceable gold buried inside a house he legally owned was a lethal dose of venom. His survival instincts completely evaporated, replaced by blinding, consuming avarice. $10 million in gold would pay off the offshore syndicate and leave him $2 million to start a new life. He did not care that the story sounded insane. He did not care that I looked completely unhinged. He only heard the promise of salvation. Tariq pointed to the screen as Darius began firing off frantic text messages to his corrupt associates. The first message went to the disgraced psychiatrist, Dr. Evans. The text read, "Cancel the ambulance. Delay the 10:13 psychiatric hold until tomorrow night. I need the old lady loose for another 24 hours. Keep the paramedics on standby." The second message went to Chloe. "Do not come to the Buckhead house tonight," Darius typed. "Stay at the downtown condo. I have a contractor coming to do an emergency structural inspection before we list the property for sale. Do not ask questions." The third and final message went to a heavy machinery rental company on the outskirts of Atlanta. Darius was bypassing regular construction crews, entirely choosing a shady cash-only demolition supplier. "I need 3 industrial pneumatic jackhammers, a concrete saw, and a sledgehammer delivered to the rear service entrance of the Buckhead estate within the hour," Darius wrote. "I am paying triple your usual rate for absolute discretion. The crew unloads the equipment and leaves. I am doing the demolition myself." Tariq sat back in his chair, staring at the confirmation receipts flashing across the screen. The equipment rental company accepted the massive cash deposit. The heavy machinery was currently being loaded onto a flatbed truck heading straight for my mansion. He swallowed hard, looking up at me with profound realization. "Grandma," he said softly, "you just convinced him to tear down his own $4 million house." I looked at the live feed of Darius, driving recklessly through the Atlanta streets, rushing back to the estate to begin his frantic, sweaty search for phantom treasure. I picked up my cold cup of coffee and took a long, deeply satisfying sip. I watched the live feed of Darius driving recklessly toward the estate to begin his search for phantom treasure. I lifted my cold coffee and took a long, satisfying sip. "I am not simply convincing him to damage the house, Tariq," I said. "I am giving him a task so consuming that he will stop watching everything else. Keep the feeds running. I have an appointment across town in 90 minutes, and I need him exhausted, distracted, and certain that salvation is beneath that floor." The deafening roar of a pneumatic jackhammer violently rattled the tiny speakers of Tariq's laptop. I did not flinch at the noise. I simply pulled my chair closer to the glowing screen and watched the live surveillance feed from the basement wine cellar of my Buckhead mansion. Tariq typed a quick command into his terminal, isolating the audio feed to filter out the mechanical screeching so we could hear the ragged breathing of the man destroying my property. Darius was stripped down to a sweat-soaked undershirt. A thick cloud of pulverized concrete and drywall dust hung in the air, catching the harsh glare of the temporary halogen work lights he had dragged down the stairs. The pristine, climate-controlled cellar had cost me $200,000 to build. It featured imported Italian marble flooring and custom-carved cedar racks designed to hold thousands of vintage bottles. Darius was currently treating it like a war zone. He swung a heavy steel sledgehammer directly into the center of a floor-to-ceiling cedar display. The expensive wood splintered instantly, sending hundreds of shattered glass bottles crashing to the ground. Dark red wine flooded across the pristine white marble, pooling around his heavy construction boots like fresh blood. He did not care. He kicked the broken wood aside, fired up the industrial jackhammer again, and drove the vibrating steel chisel directly into the center of the marble floor. The heavy stone cracked instantly. Huge, jagged chunks of expensive Italian marble flew into the air, striking the walls and shattering the remaining glass fixtures. Darius was panting heavily, his chest heaving with every breath. The knuckles on his left hand were scraped and bleeding, dripping bright red drops onto the handle of the machinery. His eyes were wide-wild and completely consumed by a feverish, frantic greed. He was no longer a smooth-talking corporate executive. I was a desperate, trapped animal tearing apart his own cage looking for a golden key. Through the surveillance feed, I watched the heavy oak door at the top of the cellar stairs swing open. Chloe ran down the steps, coughing violently as the thick cloud of concrete dust hit her lungs. She was wearing a silk nightgown, her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, staring in absolute horror at the decimated room. The walls were stripped to the studs. The custom flooring was nothing but a jagged crater of exposed dirt and broken pipes. "What are you doing?" Chloe screamed over the roaring engine of the jackhammer. "Stop it, Darius. You are destroying the foundation. The real estate broker is coming back tomorrow to take the listing photos. You are ruining the resale value." Darius did not hear her over the machinery. Chloe stepped directly into the pool of spilled wine and grabbed his shoulder, pulling him back. Darius spun around, his face contorted in pure, violent rage. He dropped the heavy jackhammer, letting it crash onto the exposed concrete. He grabbed my daughter by both of her shoulders, his bloody fingers staining the pale silk of her nightgown. "Forget the listing photos," he roared, shaking her so hard her head snapped back. "The house takes 30 days to close." "I do not have 30 days, Chloe. I have until Friday. Do you understand me? If I do not wire that money to the Cayman accounts by Friday, they are going to kill me. They are going to pull me out of my car and put a bullet in my head." Chloe began to sob uncontrollably. She tried to pry his bloody hands off her shoulders, but he tightened his grip, stepping directly into her space. "Your mother hid $10 million in untraceable gold bullion under this floor," Darius screamed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. I heard her on the phone. She poured 3 feet of industrial concrete over the crates to hide it from the federal government. "Once I break through this foundation, we do not have to sell anything. I pay the debt and we walk away rich. Now get out of my way and let me dig." Darius shoved her backward with terrifying force. Chloe lost her footing on the wet marble and slammed hard against the staircase railing. She slid down to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest and weeping openly into her hands. She sat there in the dirt and the spilled wine, completely paralyzed by fear. Darius did not even look back at her. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, gripped the handles of the heavy machinery, and drove the steel bit back into the stone. I sat in the quiet hotel suite, watching my daughter cry on the laptop screen. Pain moved through me despite everything she had done. She was still the child I had once carried through fevers and nightmares. But love did not require me to step into a burning building she had helped set on fire. I would not rescue her by surrendering myself. Record every single frame of this footage, Tariq. I commanded my voice entirely devoid of emotion. Back the files up to 3 separate secure cloud servers. I want high-resolution screenshots of his bloody hands and every single hole he is punching into that foundation. Do not miss a second of his labor. Tariq nodded, his fingers flying across the keyboard to initiate the secure backup protocols. He did not ask questions. He understood the assignment perfectly. I stood up from the table, smoothed the lapels of my tailored charcoal trench coat, and picked up my leather handbag. Keep monitoring the perimeter cameras, I told him, walking toward the suite door. If he leaves that basement for any reason, you send a warning text to my burner phone immediately. I have a meeting across town and I cannot be disturbed. I left the hotel and stepped into the cool evening air of the city. The valet brought my car around to the front drive. I slid into the driver's seat and merged onto the busy highway, heading straight toward the financial district. The contrast between my calm, methodical drive and the frantic, violent destruction happening inside my former home was not lost on me. Darius was currently breaking his back, tearing up solid concrete for a treasure that did not exist. I was exhausting his physical energy and his mental sanity, while I was simply shifting chess pieces across a board he could not even see. I pulled into the private underground parking garage of the Buckhead Cigar and Bourbon Club. The establishment was highly exclusive, requiring a steep annual membership fee and a flawless corporate pedigree to even walk through the front doors. It was the preferred meeting ground for the most ruthless executives and litigators in the Southeast. I handed my keys to the private attendant and walked through the heavy brass doors. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged tobacco and expensive mahogany. The lighting was deliberately dim, casting long shadows over the plush leather booths and private tasting rooms. A jazz pianist played softly in the corner, providing a perfect acoustic cover for highly sensitive conversations. At the rear table sat Adrian Cole, my corporate attorney of 27 years. His silver hair was neatly combed, and a black briefcase rested beside his chair. Cole had designed most of the legal walls protecting Sterling Freight. He understood every entity, every trust, and every dormant obligation better than any living person except me. He did not waste time asking how I felt. He poured a small measure of bourbon into the empty glass across from him and opened his briefcase. "Tell me exactly what he filed," I said. Cole placed 3 certified county records on the table. The first was the deed transferring the Buckhead residence. The second was an assignment of 100% of the membership interest in Sterling Legacy Holdings. The third was an acceptance and assumption agreement bearing Darius' freshly notarized signature. "He filed all 3 documents this morning," Cole said. "He did not merely receive what you signed last month. He personally certified that he had reviewed the schedules and voluntarily accepted every asset obligation covenant and pending claim attached to the holding company." I studied the signature. Darius had rushed so quickly to make the takeover irreversible that he had signed the one page capable of destroying him. Sterling Legacy Holdings sounded like the crown of our organization. That was intentional. Charles and I created the entity years earlier as a defensive container for assets that required special management. It owned the mansion because we wanted the residents separated from operating risk. It also owned Riverbend Industrial, a dormant warehouse parcel near the riverfront. A decade ago, we purchased Riverbend to build a central freight hub. During the first excavation phase, contractors uncovered buried drums and contaminated soil. The previous owners had used sections of the land as an illegal chemical dumping ground. We stopped construction, immediately notified environmental authorities, and hired independent engineers. The investigation lasted years. Insurance companies, former owners, contractors, and lenders fought over responsibility. The Environmental Protection Agency placed the site under a federal remediation covenant with a potential exposure of $25 million. That number represented the maximum projected cost if every disputed party failed to contribute. We had negotiated extensions while our legal team pursued insurance coverage and claims against the polluters. The liability never threatened Sterling Freight because the fleet contracts, dispatch systems, active warehouses, and customer relationships were held in separate operating companies beneath the Sterling Family Enterprise Trust. Riverbend and the mansion remained inside Legacy Holdings. The arrangement was not created to trap Darius. It was created long before he entered our family, so a problem connected to one parcel could never destroy the livelihoods of hundreds of employees. Every annual statement for Legacy Holdings listed the Riverbend proceeding. Every transfer document required a successor to sign the assumption schedule. A careful buyer would have asked for environmental reports, insurance correspondence, and pending claims. Darius asked for none of them. He saw the words Legacy Holdings and decided the name must contain everything valuable. When he prepared the restructuring packet, he selected the entity himself. My signature transferred the membership interest, but his own acceptance agreement made the transfer effective. By filing it, he represented to the county, the federal agencies, and every creditor that he understood what he was taking. I did not create the contamination, and I had not lured him into signing. My choice came after he revealed his intention. Once I understood what he had done, I could have asked a judge to freeze the transfer immediately. Instead, I allowed him to confirm it publicly, while Tariq and Cole collected proof of the fraud surrounding it. Darius had demanded ownership. I was going to let ownership answer him. Cole placed the federal notice over the transfer records. The settlement extension on Riverbend expired Friday at 5 o'clock. If the controlling owner failed to fund the first remediation installment, the government could place liens on every asset inside Legacy Holdings and pursue the responsible parties named in the assumption agreement. That explained the process server and Darius' terror. He owed $8 million to violent lenders and had just volunteered for a federal obligation more than 3 times as large. The house he planned to sell was now trapped inside a company facing an immediate lien. "Can he sell the freight fleet before Friday?" I asked. Cole shook his head. He never owned it. Sterling Freight Operations, the trucks, the route contracts, the active warehouses, the software, and the customer agreements belong to the Sterling Family Enterprise Trust. You are the managing trustee. Tariq is the contingent successor. Darius has no voting interest and no authority to transfer a single tire. He slid an ownership chart toward me. The company names were similar enough to confuse a man who valued appearances, but the separation was absolute. Legacy Holdings owned the residence Riverbend and several dormant assets. Sterling Freight Operations owned the living business. The documents Darius waved in my living room had transferred only the first. "I thought the quitclaim deed and the holding company assignment gave him an empire," I said. "I thought confidence could replace due diligence," Cole replied. "The law does not protect a man from a disclosure he refuses to read and then certifies that he reviewed." My burner phone vibrated against the table. Tariq had sent an urgent report. Darius had found no gold beneath the wine cellar. The syndicate fixer had issued a final ultimatum demanding payment before the end of the week. Darius responded with the most desperate maneuver in the corporate playbook. He was organizing a Friday night shareholder gala at a downtown hotel. Public invitations went to investors, politicians, and socialites. Private encrypted invitations went to local representatives of the offshore syndicate. I studied the attached contracts. He intended to conduct an illegal auction in the middle of the ballroom. He would offer the most profitable freight routes and warehouse leases to the syndicate as satisfaction of his debt. The legitimate guests would provide a respectable backdrop while criminals received stolen paper. Cole examined the contracts line by line. Every page offered property Darius did not own. Several signatures were copied from old corporate resolutions. The deposit instructions routed funds through offshore accounts connected to the same syndicate that had financed his failed speculation. "If the buyers learn the truth inside that room, the situation could become violent," Cole warned. "Then we will not enter the room alone." Tariq had preserved communications, but private data collected from household systems was not enough by itself. Cole contacted Special Agent Miller of the FBI Cybercrimes Division, an officer he had worked with during an earlier cargo theft investigation. We provided a sworn statement, the original access logs, and the synchronized records from the family devices. The agents sought emergency warrants rather than relying solely on Tariq copies. By Thursday night, federal investigators had independently confirmed the offshore transfers, the doctor payment, the false medical document, and the planned auction. They traced the $50,000 to Evans and obtained his messages directly from the service provider. They recovered a draft conservatorship petition from Darius' cloud account and found instructions to the transport company ordering chemical restraints. The evidence changed the entire strategy. We were no longer planning a private family confrontation. The gala would become the final overt act in a federal fraud conspiracy. Once Darius displayed the forged contracts and requested payment, the agents could move without relying on assumptions about what he intended. The hotel agreed to cooperate. Its security contractor would follow instructions from federal law enforcement rather than Darius. Plainclothes agents would enter as servers, technicians, and guests. Tactical teams would remain behind the service corridors until Agent Miller gave the command. EPA Counsel prepared a representative to serve the final remediation order after the deadline. Cole prepared certified trust records proving that Darius possessed no legal authority over the operating company. Tariq worked with the hotel audiovisual director, so every document could be displayed through a secure connection that Darius could not interrupt. Our objective was not to provoke the syndicate. It was to control the instant when every lie collapsed. The agents wanted the armed men seated away from civilians and the exits locked before the presentation began. The hotel removed decorative objects that could become weapons and quietly replaced several employees with trained officers. Cole closed the folder and looked directly at me. "Are you certain you want to be present?" he asked. "We can let the authorities arrest him without putting you or Tariq in the ballroom." A quiet arrest would leave room for Darius to claim that I had misunderstood the transfer. It would allow investors to wonder whether I had lost control. It would give Chloe another chance to hide behind his story and give the syndicate time to invent a different explanation for the worthless contracts. Darius had tried to turn my age into a public weakness. He sent Chloe to humiliate me before my peers. He planned to erase my voice with a medical label. The truth needed witnesses, not because I wanted applause, but because reputation was one of the assets he had tried to steal. I told Cole to enlarge the ownership chart, the assumption agreement, the federal deadline, and the messages authorizing the false psychiatric hold. I wanted every person in that room to understand the sequence without legal jargon. Darius claimed the entity. Darius accepted the liability. Darius offered property held by a different trust. Darius paid a doctor to remove the only person who could expose him. My phone buzzed again. Tariq had confirmed the auction would begin Friday at 8 o'clock. Darius had already promised the syndicate that signed route assignments would be delivered before 9. I typed a short reply. "Wear your best suit. We have a family meeting to attend." Cole lifted his bourbon but did not drink. He watched me across the table with the expression of a man who had spent decades building walls and was about to see whether they could survive a direct attack. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "once the doors close, there will be no private ending. Your daughter will be arrested if the evidence supports it." I knew that. The knowledge settled behind my ribs like a stone. "Do your job, Adrian," I said. "I will do mine." The next 2 days moved with the discipline of a major fleet launch. Every decision had a timestamp, an owner, and a backup. Cole worked from his office with federal counsel. Tariq remained in the hotel suite beside an isolated workstation. I returned to Sterling Freight headquarters through a private entrance before dawn on Friday. Only 4 senior executives knew the truth. I told them that an unauthorized person was attempting to sell company assets and that federal authorities were involved. I did not tell them about the cartel or the psychiatric plan. They did not need fear. They needed instructions. We froze every optional change to customer accounts. Route managers called our largest clients and confirmed that no contract amendment would be valid without my direct written approval and a verification phrase known only to the trust office. Dispatch supervisors checked every tractor and trailer against the asset register. Payroll prepared an emergency file that could be released from the reserve bank if Darius tried another interruption. The people around the table did not ask whether I was still capable of leading. They asked what needed to be protected first. Their calm competence reminded me that Darius' mistake was larger than misreading a legal entity. He believed a company was a collection of papers and expensive equipment. He never understood that a company was a network of people trained to keep promises under pressure. At 10 that morning, a longtime driver named Raymond knocked on my office door. He had worked for Charles and me since the days when our dispatch room had 2 folding chairs and a coffee maker that leaked onto the floor. He placed his cap against his chest and said rumors were moving through the yard. "Is somebody trying to take the company, Mrs. Sterling?" he asked. "Somebody tried," I answered. "Do the drivers need to do anything?" "Keep the loads moving. Refuse unusual instructions. Call your supervisor if anyone asks you to change a route without the code." Raymond nodded. Then he looked at the framed photograph of Charles on my shelf. "Mr. Sterling used to say the worst time to abandon a schedule is when somebody wants you confused." I smiled despite the weight in my chest. Charles had said that during storms, labor disputes, and one memorable week when 3 engines failed before sunrise. Raymond carried the message back to the yard. By noon, every driver knew only what was necessary. The company would operate normally, and no one would accept orders from Darius. Tariq arrived at headquarters shortly after lunch wearing jeans and carrying a backpack. He looked more like a tired student than the composed young man who would enter the ballroom that night. Dark circles marked the skin beneath his eyes. I told him to sleep for 2 hours in the executive restroom. "I am fine," he said. "No, you are not. Exhaustion makes smart people trust the first answer that appears. That is how I signed the packet." The reminder silenced him. He set 3 alarms and lay down without arguing. While he slept, I opened the drawer containing Charles' diamond lapel pin. He had given it to me on our 30th anniversary after pretending for a week that he had forgotten the date. The pin was not the most expensive piece I owned, but it was the one he chose himself. I fastened it to the crimson suit I planned to wear and looked at my reflection. I did not see a queen marching toward a public execution. I saw a 68-year-old widow who had made a serious mistake and refused to let that mistake become a death sentence. The distinction mattered. Arrogance had destroyed Darius. I would not borrow his disease simply because I intended to defeat him. At 3 o'clock, Cole arrived with the final presentation in printed form. We reviewed every slide for accuracy. The ownership chart used plain language. The environmental notice showed the potential exposure and missed deadline without claiming that every disputed dollar was immediately final. The medical evidence showed exactly what Darius authorized and nothing more. No insults appeared on the screens. No private photograph of Chloe was included. We were exposing conduct, not manufacturing humiliation. The truth was already severe enough. Agent Miller joined by secure video. He explained the entry signal and the emergency plan. If any syndicate representative reached for a weapon, the agents would intervene immediately, even if the presentation was incomplete. If Darius attempted to flee, he would be stopped behind the stage. If Chloe left before the auction began, officers would not prevent her unless the warrant required it. That final point stayed with me. Chloe still had one last exit. She could walk out of the ballroom before Darius asked for money. It would not erase her earlier actions, but it would show that some part of her conscience remained alive. At 6:15, Tariq woke and dressed in the charcoal suit Cole had arranged. He checked the evidence case twice, then handed me the remote control for the hotel presentation. "You should keep this," he said. "If something happens to me, you can advance the slides." "Nothing is going to happen to you." "That is not a plan, Grandma." I was right. I placed the remote inside my handbag and gave him a second copy of the trust certificate. We repeated the exit routes and the phrase that would tell hotel security to move civilians. Before leaving, I called the operations center. The night dispatcher confirmed that every load was covered. A refrigerated shipment of insulin was moving north. Grocery trailers were leaving for 3 states. 2 replacement engines were already on their way to a stranded driver outside Macon. The ordinary work continued. That was the reason for everything. At 7:20, our car stopped beneath the hotel awning. Cole entered through the service corridor to meet federal counsel. Tariq and I remained in the car for one final minute. He stared at the ballroom windows glowing above us. "I keep thinking about Mom," he said. "What if she did not know all of it? Then the evidence will show what she knew. We will not add to it, and we will not subtract from it. What if she asks me to choose? She already asked you to choose when she allowed Darius to threaten us. Tonight, you choose the truth. After tonight, you can decide what kind of son you want to be without anyone using fear to control the answer." Tariq breathed slowly and nodded. We stepped from the car and entered through a private conference room. Agent Miller checked the evidence case seal. The hotel security director confirmed that the armed guests had been seated at the front tables away from the main exits. Through a narrow window in the service door, I saw Chloe near the bar. She looked toward the entrance more than once. For several seconds, I believed she might leave. Then Darius touched her back and pointed toward an investor. Chloe forced a smile and remained beside him. Her final exit closed at 8 o'clock. The string quartet played a soft, classical arrangement that clashed horribly with the suffocating tension filling the Four Seasons grand ballroom. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the 50 round tables, but the light could not hide the grotesque reality of the guest list. Legitimate Atlanta investors wearing bespoke tuxedos sat shoulder to shoulder with heavily armed men stuffed into cheap, ill-fitting rental suits. These men did not sip their champagne. They gripped their glasses with thick, scarred fingers, keeping their eyes locked entirely on the stage. Their presence turned the luxury venue into a powder keg waiting for a match. Darius stood behind the lucite podium, sweating profusely, straight through the back of his dark emerald velvet suit jacket. He gripped the edges of the podium so tightly his knuckles were turning white. He forced a wide, desperate smile, addressing the crowd with a booming voice that cracked slightly at the edges. He welcomed the esteemed guests to the new era of the logistics empire, gesturing broadly to large presentation boards displaying the commercial fleet routes. I was actively running an illegal shadow auction right in front of the city elite, offering up the primary shipping contracts to the silent, dangerous men in the front row to satisfy his massive blood debt. Chloe stood trembling near the main wet bar, serving as the reluctant hostess. She held a crystal flute of sparkling water, but the liquid was shaking violently, splashing over the rim onto her designer gown. Her eyes darted frantically between the legitimate businessmen and the hardened cartel enforcers occupying the VIP tables. The reality of the lethal danger they had invited into a public space was finally crushing her. She flinched every time one of the men in the cheap suits shifted in his chair or reached a hand inside his jacket. She was completely trapped in a nightmare of her own making, watching her husband attempt to sell stolen goods to murderers. I did not knock or wait for an usher to announce my arrival. I pushed both of the heavy mahogany double doors open with a forceful thrust that slammed the brass handles loudly against the corridor walls. The sharp, violent sound cut right through the classical music and the low hum of conversation. The string quartet stopped playing instantly. 500 heads turned toward the entrance in perfect unison. I stepped over the threshold wearing a sharply tailored crimson suit, black leather stilettos, and the diamond lapel pin Charles had given me. Tariq walked half a step behind my right shoulder in a charcoal gray suit, carrying the sealed silver evidence case. He was not a trained operative, and he carried no weapon. He simply followed the security briefing, scanning the marked exits and locating the federal agents positioned around the room. Darius stopped speaking mid-sentence. His mouth hung open. The microphone picked up his sudden, sharp intake of breath, amplifying it across the massive room. He stared at me with pure, unadulterated shock. He quickly recovered, slapping his hand against the podium and pointing directly at the main entrance. He locked eyes with the head of the private security detail, stationed near the coat check. "Remove her," Darius barked into the microphone, his voice echoing loudly. "Escort that woman out of the building immediately. She is not on the guest list, and she is trespassing on a private corporate event." 6 large security guards dressed in black suits were positioned around the perimeter of the ballroom. Darius waved his hand aggressively, commanding them to move forward and grab my arms. The room held its collective breath, waiting for the physical altercation. Not a single guard moved a muscle. The head of security crossed his arms and ignored Darius' frantic gestures. I kept walking down the center aisle while my stilettos clicked against the hardwood floor. As I passed, he gave me a subtle nod. The hotel owner and federal authorities had instructed the security team hours earlier. Darius had reserved the ballroom, but he did not control the building or the lawful response inside it. "Get them out of here!" Darius screamed, tapping the microphone aggressively. He looked at the other guards stationed near the buffet line, demanding they intervene. The guards remained perfectly still, staring blankly at the far wall. The legitimate investors in the crowd began to murmur, exchanging confused and alarmed glances. The cartel members in the front row leaned forward, resting their heavy elbows on the tables, their eyes narrowing as they assessed the sudden shift in the power dynamic. Chloe broke away from the wet bar, rushing across the room to intercept me before I could reach the front tables. She planted herself directly in my path, holding her hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. The absolute terror in her eyes was palpable. She was shaking so badly her diamond earrings rattled against her neck. "Mom, please, you cannot be here," Chloe whispered frantically, her voice cracking with pure panic. "You do not understand who these people are. You do not know what is happening. If you do not turn around and leave right now, they are going to hurt us. They are going to hurt all of us. You have to walk away." I did not stop walking. I did not slow my pace. I stepped directly into her personal space, forcing her to stumble backward to avoid a collision. I looked her dead in the eyes, and my voice carried the freezing, absolute authority of an Arctic winter. "You invited the wolves to the dinner table, Chloe," I said, stepping smoothly around her trembling frame. "Now you have to sit down and watch them eat." I left her standing in the aisle and continued toward the stage. Tariq remained close behind me, but he was not my shield. Federal agents seated at nearby tables watched every movement. As we approached the front row, several syndicate men shifted their chairs and moved their hands toward their jackets. The agents adjusted their positions without drawing attention. Tariq kept both hands visible and continued walking. The lead syndicate representative noticed the security director near the wall and the plainclothes agents positioned among the guests. He slowly placed his own hand flat on the table and signaled the men beside him to wait. They wanted their money and were willing to hear the interruption before risking a room they no longer understood. I reached the wooden stairs leading up to the main stage and walked up the steps with flawless posture. Darius was gripping the lucite podium so hard the plastic was groaning under the pressure. He was completely trapped between a room full of heavily armed creditors and a mother-in-law who refused to die quietly. He scrambled to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation, leaning heavily into the microphone to address the whispering crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this unexpected delay," Darius announced, his voice dripping with condescending false sympathy. "My mother-in-law is severely unwell. She is suffering from advanced medical issues, and she has tragically wandered away from her care facility. Please excuse this sad interruption while we get her the medical assistance she desperately needs." I stepped right up to the podium, invading his space completely. He tried to block the microphone with his shoulder, leaning his body weight forward to shield the equipment. I did not ask for permission. I reached out, grabbed the thick metal stem of the microphone stand, and yanked it violently out of his sweaty hands. The sudden feedback screeched through the overhead speakers, forcing several people in the front row to cover their ears. Darius stumbled backward, tripping over a thick black audio cable taped to the stage floor. He caught himself on the edge of the projection screen, looking at me with pure, unhinged desperation. He opened his mouth to shout another command, but the absolute freezing fury in my eyes shut his throat completely closed. I turned my back on him, completely dismissing his existence. I looked out over the massive ballroom, staring directly at the cartel fixers sitting in the cheap rental suits. I brought the microphone up to my mouth, keeping my voice perfectly level, carrying the commanding resonance of a woman entirely in control of the battlefield. "My son-in-law wanted to be the king of this family," I announced, the words echoing powerfully through the dead silent ballroom. "He wanted to sit at the head of the table. He wanted to control the fleet, the properties, and the legacy that I built with my bare hands. So I stepped aside. I handed him the keys to the kingdom. I gave him the crown." I paused, letting the heavy weight of the declaration settle over the crowd. I glanced back at Darius, who was currently wiping a thick layer of cold sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his velvet jacket. But he was so blinded by his own frantic greed that he completely forgot to read the fine print. I continued, turning my gaze back to the audience. I lowered the microphone slightly and snapped my fingers, offering a single sharp visual cue. Tariq stepped forward and set the sealed silver case beside the hotel control station. The audiovisual technician who had been working with Agent Miller opened the authorized connection. Tariq removed the laptop and verified the evidence package while the technician switched the projectors away from Darius' presentation. The laptop illuminated Tariq, face in the dim stage light. He checked the file hashes against the copies held by Cole and Agent Miller, then gave the technician permission to begin. The shipping maps disappeared from the screens, and a blank white field replaced them. Tariq looked up and gave me one sharp nod. The presentation was verified and ready. The screens did not remain blank. Tariq entered one final command, and the county filing appeared across all 3 projectors. Darius' signature filled the center screen. Beneath it, a highlighted line from the acceptance agreement stated that the new controlling member assumed every disclosed obligation, covenant, and pending federal claim attached to Sterling Legacy Holdings. The second screen displayed the EPA notice. The Riverbend remediation exposure stood in bold type beside the 5 o'clock deadline. A digital clock in the corner showed that the deadline had passed more than 3 hours earlier. A ripple moved through the legitimate investors. Several leaned toward one another, reading the words again. The men at the syndicate tables did not speak. They watched Darius. The next slide showed the ownership structure. Sterling Legacy Holdings sat on the left, connected only to the Buckhead Residence, Riverbend Industrial, and several dormant parcels. On the right, a separate branch showed Sterling Freight Operations, the fleet customer contracts, active warehouses, software and dispatch network beneath the Sterling Family Enterprise Trust. Tariq enlarged the trust certificate. My name appeared as managing trustee. His appeared as contingent successor. Darius' name appeared nowhere. The route maps Darius had displayed minutes earlier returned to the screen, but now each was stamped with the name of the true owner. Every route he offered belonged to the trust. Every warehouse lease required authorization he did not possess. Every auction contract in the ballroom was worthless. Then came the financial records. The $50,000 payment to Dr. Evans. The fabricated medical evaluation. The message promising to place me under an involuntary hold. The instructions ordering the private transport team to use chemical restraints. The demolition rental invoice. The offshore account designated to receive the auction deposits. No one needed me to explain what the documents meant. Darius had claimed he was protecting an elderly woman while preparing to drug her. He had claimed he owned an empire while offering assets held by a separate trust. He had invited criminals to exchange money for paper that could not transfer anything. Chloe stood near the bar with both hands covering her mouth. The screen reflected in her eyes. Whether she knew every detail before that moment no longer mattered to the room. Everyone could see the choices she had already made. Darius was hyperventilating. He grabbed the edge of the lucite podium, his chest heaving violently. "You set me up," he screamed. "You knew about the environmental debt. You let me take a poisoned company." "I did not set you up, Darius," I replied, my voice absolutely calm and perfectly amplified. "I simply stepped out of your way. I let you rush forward blindly to claim a throne you did not earn. You forged medical documents. You tried to freeze my bank accounts. You brought violent criminals into a public space to auction off a legacy that did not belong to you. I did not dig this grave for you, Darius. I just handed you the shovel." Chloe broke away from the frozen crowd near the wet bar. She stumbled down the center aisle, her beige trench coat flapping open. Her face was streaked with ruined mascara and genuine absolute terror. She recognized the men sitting in the front row. She understood exactly what the $25 million federal liability meant for her husband's survival. "Mom, please," Chloe shrieked, throwing herself at the base of the wooden stage stairs. "You have to help us. If the company is worthless, they are going to kill him. They are going to take everything we have. You have to undo the transfer. You have to take the liability back." I looked down at my biological daughter. She was kneeling on the polished hardwood floor, sobbing hysterically, begging for a financial bailout to save a husband who had spent the last 48 hours trying to lock me in a psychiatric ward. "I cannot erase what he signed, Chloe," I said. "Your husband filed the transfer and certified that he accepted the disclosed obligations. The federal deadline passed at 5 o'clock. The freight company is not part of that entity, and it never was." The cartel enforcer, sitting at the center VIP table, slowly stood up from his chair. He was a broad-shouldered man with a jagged scar running down his jawline. He did not yell. He did not make any sudden aggressive movements. He simply buttoned his cheap rental suit jacket and looked directly at Darius. The enforcer voice was low, barely above a whisper, but it carried a lethal, terrifying weight. "You brought us here to sell us a toxic federal debt, Darius. You tried to sell the syndicate a poisoned asset to cover an $8 million deficit. You do not have the fleet. You do not have the warehouses. You have absolutely nothing." Darius backed away from the podium, stumbling over the thick black audio cables scattered across the stage floor. He held his hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture, shaking his head violently. "No, wait, please," he stammered, his voice pitching high with panic. "I can get the money. I can liquidate the Buckhead mansion. The house is worth $4 million. I can give you the deed to the house tonight." The cartel enforcer shook his head slowly. "A house tied to a federal environmental lien is worthless, Darius. The government will seize the property by Monday morning. Your accounts will be frozen. Your assets will be garnished. You are completely bankrupt. The syndicate does not negotiate with bankrupt men. We just collect the collateral." The enforcer reached inside his suit jacket, his hand resting deliberately on the hidden holster. The other men sitting at the VIP tables immediately stood up, following their leader's subtle physical cue. The legitimate investors in the ballroom realized the extreme danger of the situation. Chairs scraped violently against the hardwood floor as several businessmen scrambled backward, trying to put distance between themselves and the cartel operatives. Darius let out a raw, terrified scream. He spun around wildly, looking for an exit route. He lunged toward the heavy velvet curtains draped across the back of the stage, hoping to escape through the kitchen service corridor. He took exactly 3 frantic steps before the massive glass windows lining the eastern wall of the ballroom began to shake violently. The low, pulsating hum of a heavy diesel engine reverberated through the elegant dining space. Tariq stepped forward, holding a small remote control module in his left hand. He pressed a single red button. The heavy mahogany double doors at the main entrance burst open with explosive force. Atlanta Police Department. Nobody move. Keep your hands where we can see them. The command was deafening, echoing through a heavy tactical megaphone. Dozens of heavily armed law enforcement officers stormed into the ballroom, swarming the space in seconds. They were wearing dark tactical vests with the letters FBI and EPA stenciled boldly across their backs in bright yellow paint. Federal marshals carrying assault rifles fanned out across the room, instantly securing all exits and establishing a hard perimeter. The cartel enforcers froze, immediately recognizing they were severely outgunned and completely surrounded by federal agents. The lead enforcer slowly pulled his empty hand out of his jacket, placing it flat on the white tablecloth, indicating total surrender. The tactical teams moved in swiftly, pressing the men against the walls and stripping them of their concealed weapons. Darius stood frozen near the back of the stage, his hands raised above his head, trembling violently. The arrogant corporate raider had completely vanished, replaced by a terrified, broken man, facing the absolute collapse of his entire existence. A senior FBI agent wearing a sharp navy suit walked purposefully down the center aisle. He bypassed the detained cartel members and headed straight toward the wooden stage stairs. He stopped in front of Chloe, who was still kneeling on the floor, sobbing into her hands. The agent ignored her entirely, turning his intense focus directly onto my son-in-law. Darius Vance, the agent, announced, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, international money laundering, attempted elder exploitation, falsification of medical records, and obstruction related to a federal remediation proceeding. Additional charges may follow." Darius' legs gave out completely. He collapsed onto the stage floor, weeping uncontrollably. Two heavily armored federal marshals rushed up the stairs, grabbing his arms and hauling him roughly to his feet. The cold, sharp click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed loudly through the silent ballroom. I stood perfectly still, watching the marshals drag my son-in-law away. He did not look like a king anymore. He looked exactly like what he was, a greedy, desperate coward who had finally been swallowed by the dark water he tried to push me into. Tariq closed the silver case and secured the latches. His part of the strategy had been careful rather than theatrical. While Darius destroyed the cellar searching for phantom gold, Tariq preserved the household logs and turned them over through coal. Federal agents then obtained their own records from devices, banks, and service providers, confirming the offshore transfers, the syndicate communications, and the $50,000 payment to Dr. Evans before the gala began. The lead FBI agent looked up at me, offering a brief, respectful nod. "We have it from here, Mrs. Sterling," he said quietly. "Thank you for your precise cooperation." I nodded back, maintaining my absolute composure. I did not gloat or smile. I simply adjusted the collar of my crimson blazer and turned to walk toward the main exit. "Mom, wait, please." Chloe's desperate, pleading voice stopped me. She scrambled up from the floor, grabbing the edge of my tailored suit jacket with trembling hands. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in thick, dark streams. Her carefully crafted socialite image was completely destroyed. "Mom, you have to help me," she sobbed, pulling frantically on the fabric of my coat. "They are going to take everything. The house, the cars, the bank accounts. I did not know about the cartel. I swear I did not know about the money laundering. Darius manipulated me. He lied to me. You have to protect me. You are my mother." I looked down at her hands gripping my jacket. I slowly reached down and peeled her fingers off the fabric one by one. I stepped back, creating a deliberate physical boundary between us. The ballroom was completely silent. The federal agents, the legitimate investors, the detained criminals, everyone watched the final confrontation between a matriarch and her betrayer. "I am your mother, Chloe," I said, my voice steady, carrying the cold, heavy weight of absolute finality. "I raised you to be strong. I taught you how to build a legacy. But when your husband walked into my living room, pulled the plug on my television, and ordered me out of the house, your father built you, looked away. When they froze my credit cards and tried to humiliate me at the country club, you led the charge. When they plotted to drug me and lock me in a psychiatric ward so they could steal my empire, you stayed entirely silent." Chloe covered her face with her hands, letting out a long, jagged wail of pure despair. "You chose the shiny car and the country club membership over your own blood." I continued, stepping smoothly around her weeping frame. "You made your choice, Chloe. Today I am making mine. I am looking away." I did not wait for her response. Tariq and I walked down the center aisle while agents secured the room. The crowd parted for us. We stepped through the heavy mahogany doors, leaving the shouting, the handcuffs, and the shattered auction behind us. The confrontation was finished. The consequences were only beginning. The cold autumn wind hit my face the absolute second we crossed the threshold of the hotel lobby and stepped out onto the concrete valet drive. The heavy mahogany double doors swung shut behind us, muting the chaotic screams of my daughter and the violent shouting of the cartel members inside the ballroom. The sudden transition from the stifling, luxurious heat of the gala to the sharp, freezing night air felt like stepping onto an entirely different planet. I stood at the top of the grand concrete stairs, looking down at the magnificent devastation we had orchestrated. The circular driveway of the Four Seasons Hotel was completely barricaded. The civilian valet attendants had been evacuated. In their place, a massive, impenetrable wall of federal law enforcement vehicles had locked down the entire city block. Black armored transport vans idled heavily, their massive diesel engines rumbling a deep vibration that shook the pavement beneath my leather stilettos. The blinding strobes of red and blue emergency lights washed over the pristine building columns, painting the stone in rhythmic flashes of violence. Tariq stood silently beside me, gripping the silver briefcase. He did not look shocked or overwhelmed by the overwhelming tactical presence. He simply scanned the perimeter, evaluating the successful deployment of his digital strategy. A tall, imposing man, wearing a dark tactical jacket with federal badges clipped to his belt, separated himself from the barricade line. He walked purposefully up the grand stairs, moving straight toward us. He bypassed the local patrol officers securing the perimeter and extended a firm, calloused hand toward my grandson. "I am Special Agent Miller," the man said, his voice carrying the deep, gravelly tone of a veteran Cyber Crimes Division chief. "We received the encrypted data packets you routed to our secure server this afternoon. Tariq, I have spent the last 15 years dismantling international financial syndicates, and I have never seen a civilian execute a forensic data extraction with such flawless, lethal precision." Tariq shook the agent's hand, his expression remaining perfectly stoic. He handed the silver briefcase over to the federal officer. "The physical copies are inside," Tariq said. "The drives contain the original camera recordings, access logs, synchronized messages, and the verification reports showing when each file was created. I also included the device authentication history and account recovery records connected to Darius' hidden finance applications." Agent Miller opened the briefcase, inspecting the drives before snapping it shut. He looked up at me with professional respect. "Your son-in-law did not just try to steal your logistics empire, Mrs. Sterling," he said. "His effort to prove that he could repay the debt exposed accounts, devices, and contacts connected to a much wider investigation." I asked Agent Miller to clarify exactly how much damage Darius had inadvertently caused the cartel. I wanted to know the absolute scale of the destruction my son-in-law had brought upon his own head. The agent gave a grim, satisfied smile. By attempting to prove he could repay the debt, Darius logged into accounts already connected to a wider investigation. Tariq preservation work helped identify the timing and the devices. With emergency warrants, our cyber team confirmed the routing numbers and followed several transfers into accounts used by the syndicate. Agent Miller gestured toward the armored vans. "Partner agencies are freezing accounts and executing searches in several jurisdictions tonight. Darius did not destroy an international organization by himself, and Tariq did not perform magic from a hotel laptop. But their records gave us a connection we had been trying to establish for months." I watched red light move across the wet pavement. Darius was no longer merely a greedy son-in-law facing a family lawsuit. He had exposed himself to federal prosecution and to criminals who now knew his promises were worthless. A second wave of heavy vehicles suddenly turned into the barricaded driveway. These were not standard police cruisers. They were massive white utility trucks bearing the bright green insignia of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. A team of federal investigators wearing dark suits and carrying thick clipboards marched up the hotel steps. Adrian Cole stepped out from beneath the hotel awning and met the lead environmental investigator. He removed certified copies of the filed deed, the membership assignment, and the assumption agreement from his briefcase and presented them to the federal official. The investigator reviewed the successor certification and the assumption schedule under a tactical light. He handed Cole an acknowledgement, showing that the agency had received notice of the change in control and the missed deadline. The final allocation of cleanup costs would be determined through the remediation process, but Legacy Holdings and the signatory, who accepted its obligations, were now locked inside that proceeding. The heavy glass doors of the hotel lobby suddenly slid open violently. Two heavily armored federal marshals marched out into the freezing night air, dragging my son-in-law between them. Darius was completely unrecognizable. His expensive emerald velvet suit jacket was torn at the shoulder. His silk tie hung loosely around his neck, stained with sweat and sheer terror. He was not walking under his own power. His legs dragged uselessly against the concrete, forcing the marshals to carry his dead weight down the grand staircase. I stepped slightly to the left, ensuring I was directly in his line of sight as they hauled him towards the transport vans. Darius lifted his head. His eyes met mine, and a ragged, pathetic sob tore through his throat. He tried to speak, but his jaw was trembling so violently he could not form a coherent word. He looked at the silver briefcase in Agent Miller's hand. He looked at the environmental investigator standing beside my attorney, holding the binding contract of his absolute financial ruin. The horrifying reality of his situation crashed over him in real time. He had traded his freedom, his safety, and his future for a poisoned trap. At that moment, officers led the syndicate representative from the building in handcuffs. He passed Darius without speaking. The empty look he gave him carried more terror than a threat. Darius began begging the marshals for protective custody and a separate transport vehicle. They moved him quickly into an armored van and closed the steel doors. I watched the taillights glow through the exhaust. He had spent 3 days using everyone around him as protection. Now his only protection came from the same federal system he had tried to deceive. The hotel doors opened again. A female police officer walked out, gripping my biological daughter firmly by the arm. Chloe was in handcuffs. Her designer gown was ruined, torn at the hem, and stained with spilled water. Her perfectly styled hair hung in ragged clumps around her tear-streaked face. As the officer led her down the stone steps, a massive flatbed tow truck rumbled loudly into the hotel driveway, completely bypassing the police barricade. Chloe froze on the steps, her breath catching in her throat. She watched in absolute horror as a federal asset forfeiture team approached the valet stand. They bypassed the standard luxury vehicles and marched straight toward her brand-new $200,000 luxury sports car. An officer slapped a bright yellow federal seizure notice directly onto the windshield. The heavy steel hooks of the tow truck groaned loudly as they attached to the front axle, dragging her prized possession roughly onto the flatbed. She was losing everything. The offshore cartel debt and the $25 million federal environmental penalty meant the government was systematically liquidating every single asset tied to her marriage. The bank accounts were empty. The cars were seized. The luxury life she had sold her own mother to protect was vanishing before her very eyes. The reality of her total destruction finally broke whatever was left of her fragile sanity. Chloe let out a devastating guttural scream. She violently jerked her shoulder, twisting out of the female officer's grip for a split second. She lunged toward the bottom of the staircase, sprinting directly toward where Tariq and I stood near the valet curb. Her expensive heels clattered loudly against the wet pavement before one of the heels snapped completely, sending her crashing hard onto the freezing asphalt. She crawled the last few feet, ignoring the rough concrete tearing into the skin of her bare knees. She reached out with her handcuffed wrists, grasping desperately at the hem of my tailored crimson power suit. "Mom," she wailed, her voice ragged and completely unrecognizable. "Mom, please, you have to tell them. Tell the agents I did not know anything about the cartel. Tell them I did not know about the money laundering. You have to protect me. I am your daughter. Please do not let them take me away." I looked down at the trembling, broken woman clinging to my coat. The flashing emergency lights cast long, cold shadows across her terrified face. She was begging for the unconditional maternal protection she had so ruthlessly exploited just 24 hours ago. She wanted me to deploy my wealth, my lawyers, and my power to shield her from the consequences of her own malicious greed. The federal officer jogged down the stairs, reaching down to pull Chloe firmly back up by her shoulders. I raised my hand, signaling the officer to wait for just 1 second. I looked deeply into my daughter's tear-filled eyes. The night air was freezing, but the words I spoke next were absolutely colder. "You sat in my living room sipping a $200 glass of wine while your husband threw me out into the street." I stated, my voice perfectly level, cutting through her hysterical sobs like a surgical blade. You watched him forge my signature to steal the empire your father built with his own 2 hands. You stood in a country club and loudly announced to the world that I was losing my mind, trying to starve me into submission. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head violently, trying to block out the absolute truth of her own actions. I did not care. I was going to make her hear every single word. You wanted the crown, Chloe, I said, stepping smoothly out of her desperate grasp. You wanted the throne without putting in a single day of the work. Now you are wearing the heavy chains that come with it. You plotted to lock me in a psychiatric ward so you could run away to an island with stolen money. You do not get to cry for your mother now that the vault is empty and the doors are locked. Chloe looked up at me, her face completely shattered. Mom, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Please. I adjusted the collars of my crimson suit and turned to the officer. I will answer every question truthfully, I said. I will not interfere with your duty, and I will not use my money to erase what happened. Chloe let out a long, agonizing scream of pure, absolute despair as the officer hauled her backward, dragging her toward the waiting police cruiser. I did not turn around to watch her go. I took a deep, steadying breath of the sharp autumn air. I looked over at Tariq, who was standing tall and composed, holding the briefcase that contained the secured future of our true legacy. I signaled the valet from my town car, ready to leave the wreckage of their lives entirely behind us. The officer lifted Chloe gently but firmly from the pavement. She continued saying my name until the cruiser door closed. I did not pretend I could no longer hear her. I heard every word. I simply refused to transform pain into another rescue. Tariq stood beside me, holding the silver case. The confidence he had shown inside the ballroom had disappeared from his face. He watched the cruiser carrying his mother move toward the exit. Did I betray her, he asked. No, you stopped people who were harming both of us. It does not feel that simple. It is not simple, I said. Right and easy are rarely the same thing. Agent Miller returned and thanked Tariq for preserving the original records and turning them over through counsel. He explained that the warrants allowed the government to collect independent copies from service providers' devices and bank systems. Tariq information had given investigators a map, but the prosecution would rest on evidence lawfully obtained and verified by federal teams. That distinction mattered to my grandson. He had not wanted revenge for its own sake. He wanted proof strong enough to survive outside our family. Cole joined us beneath the hotel awning. The federal receiver would ask a court to take control of legacy holdings on Monday. The mansion and Riverbend parcel would remain inside the entity. The operating trust and every active freight asset were protected. What happens to the house? Tariq asked. It may be sold after the environmental case is evaluated, Cole answered. The damage in the cellar will complicate everything. Tariq looked at me. The house hurts, I said. But a building is not a legacy. Your grandfather taught me that before we could afford one. We stepped out into the crisp, cool air of the secondary valet drive. The night sky over Atlanta was clear and black, unbothered by the violence and destruction we had just left behind. The scent of pine needles and damp asphalt filled my lungs, replacing the suffocating smell of fear and expensive cologne that had dominated the ballroom. A young valet attendant wearing a pristine uniform rushed forward from his podium. He looked incredibly nervous, visibly shaken by the massive federal raid happening on the opposite side of the building. He wiped his hands on his trousers and stood at attention as we approached the booth. Good evening, Mrs. Sterling, the young man said, his voice trembling slightly. I have your vehicle ready right here. He gestured toward my sleek black town car, idling smoothly under the warm yellow glow of the portico lights. The engine hummed with a quiet, steady power completely detached from the wreckage of my daughter and her husband. I opened my burgundy leather handbag and reached into the hidden side pocket. I bypassed the titanium corporate card and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. I handed the paper directly to the young attendant. He stared at the denomination with wide, astonished eyes, gripping the bill tightly in his fist. Thank you for keeping it warm, I told him, my voice, offering a genuine, polite warmth that I had withheld for the entire evening. It has been a very long night. The attendant rushed forward and opened the heavy rear door of the town car for me. I slid into the plush leather seat, settling into the quiet, luxurious comfort of the interior. Tariq walked around the back of the vehicle and climbed into the passenger side, resting the silver briefcase securely on the floorboards between his feet. The valet closed my door with a solid, comforting thud. Tariq turned toward me in the dim streetlight. His shoulders finally dropped from the defensive posture he had carried since the false psychiatric plan was discovered. He said nothing about his mother or the handcuffs. He used his phone to delete temporary hotel copies that were no longer required, while the original evidence remained sealed with Cole and federal investigators. I leaned my head back against the soft leather headrest and closed my eyes for just a moment. The engine shifted into gear, and the car pulled smoothly away from the curb, merging onto the quiet downtown streets. The flashing red and blue emergency lights faded in the rearview mirror, becoming nothing more than tiny distant blurs before disappearing entirely behind a row of tall glass buildings. I took a slow breath and let the cool air move over my face. The tension that had coiled tight in my spine for the past 3 days began to unwind. The hostile takeover was dismantled. The federal liability structure had done what Charles and I built it to do. It protected the operating company from one reckless man. The war was officially over. I opened my eyes, watching the bright city lights blur past my window, ready to begin the meticulous, rewarding process of rebuilding my real empire tomorrow morning. I did not sleep after we returned to the hotel. At 4:30 in the morning, I changed from the crimson suit into a navy business dress and read every message that had accumulated during the raid. Some came from investors who had been in the ballroom. Some offered support. Others asked whether the company was still solvent. A few carefully avoided admitting that they had believed Darius' description of me. I answered none of them immediately. Reputation could wait until operations were secure. At 6 o'clock, Tariq and I entered Sterling Freight headquarters. The lobby receptionist stood when she saw us. She had watched news footage showing federal vehicles outside the hotel, but she did not ask for details. She simply handed me the overnight dispatch report. Every load had moved. That single fact steadied me. Darius could destroy marble and scatter rumors, but he had not delayed the medicine, the groceries, or the manufacturing parts entrusted to our drivers. I called a company-wide meeting for 8. Hundreds of employees joined by video from terminals across the region. I did not describe the cartel or show private family messages. I told them that an individual had attempted to claim authority he did not possess, and that the matter was now with federal investigators. I confirmed that the trust remained intact, payroll was funded, customer contracts were valid, and no layoffs were planned. Then I admitted my own error. I signed documents without reading them carefully, I said. Exhaustion and trust do not excuse that failure. The structure we built protected the company, but leadership requires more than surviving a mistake. It requires naming it. The room remained silent for a moment. Then Raymond raised his hand from the Macon terminal. "Are we still expected to deliver on time?" he asked. "Yes." "Then we know what to do." The tension broke. Managers returned to their boards. Mechanics went back to the bays. Drivers checked routes. The company did not need a dramatic speech. It needed certainty. After the meeting, I went down to the dispatch floor instead of returning to the executive suite. The room was alive with ringing phones, weather maps, and the steady voices of coordinators solving ordinary problems. A trailer had developed a refrigeration fault outside Birmingham. A driver needed a safe place to stop near Savannah. A customer had changed a delivery window without warning. None of those problems cared that my daughter had been arrested or that cameras waited outside the building. They demanded attention and judgment. I stood beside the central board while a young dispatcher named Lena rerouted the refrigerated load through a partner terminal. She had joined the company only 8 months earlier and had never met Charles. Her hands shook slightly when she realized I was watching. "Do not perform for me," I told her. "Solve the load." She took a breath, called the receiving manager, and secured a replacement unit within 12 minutes. The medicine would arrive only 20 minutes late, and the customer accepted the revised schedule. That is the company Darius never saw. Not the mansion, not the velvet suits or the route maps on a ballroom screen. It was Lena keeping a promise to people she would never meet. It was mechanics answering calls before sunrise and drivers checking seals in freezing rain. My responsibility was to protect that chain of trust from anyone, including myself, who believed ownership meant the right to act without limits. Before I left the floor, Raymond handed me a paper cup of coffee from the old machine in the corner. It was too strong and slightly burned. It tasted exactly like the coffee Charles and I drank during our first year in business. For the first time since the eviction, I felt something close to peace. Cole spent the day answering regulators, lenders, and insurers. The family trust issued a formal notice that Darius had never possessed authority over operating assets. Banks restored access to the accounts he had attempted to freeze after reviewing the trust resolutions and court orders. The titanium card returned to its hidden compartment. The private transport company canceled the psychiatric pickup and provided its dispatch recordings to investigators. Dr. Evans was arrested later that week. His medical license was suspended, and prosecutors charged him in connection with the false evaluation and payment. The hotel employee who installed the camera cooperated after admitting that Darius bribed him. The Buckhead property remained sealed while engineers inspected the cellar. Photographs showed broken pipes, fractured marble, damaged support surfaces, and thousands of dollars in ruined wine. Seeing the destruction in daylight affected me differently than watching it through a screen. Darius had not merely searched for money. He had attacked the physical evidence of a life he resented because he had not built it. I authorized the investigators to preserve what they needed. I asked that Charles' personal bottles and family photographs be removed before the receiver took full control. Everything else could wait. Tariq returned to Morehouse on Monday. I insisted. He wanted to remain at headquarters, but abandoning his education would have allowed Darius to damage one more future. Tariq attended classes during the day and met federal investigators with counsel when necessary. At night, he called me to confirm that I had eaten. For the first month, reporters waited outside the office. I gave one statement. I confirmed that the company was cooperating with authorities and that our employees, customers, and drivers were not involved in the alleged crimes. I refused to turn Chloe's pain into entertainment. Privately, the grief arrived in unexpected places. I heard her childhood laugh in the echo of the empty kitchen. I found an old-school photograph inside Charles' notebook. I woke once believing the phone was ringing with her college ringtone. Boundaries did not erase love. They prevented love from being used as a weapon. By the end of the first month, Sterling Freight had signed 2 new customers. By the third month, the federal receiver had separated the mansion sale process from the disputed environmental claims. By the 6th month, the criminal cases had reached their decisive stage. The heavy rhythmic vibration of a massive diesel engine rattled the thick glass of the floor-to-ceiling windows in my corner office. I did not look away from the sprawling industrial complex laid out beneath me. From this vantage point on the 10th floor of the downtown Atlanta high-rise, I possessed an unobstructed view of the real lifeblood of this city. Dozens of pristine silver and blue 18-wheelers rolled systematically through the massive security gates of the central dispatch hub. The morning sun reflected off the polished chrome exhaust pipes and the bold painted logos decorating the sides of the trailers. The air in my office smelled of rich, dark roast coffee and the faint, satisfying metallic scent of fresh printer ink. I turned away from his window and walked slowly back to the center of the expansive executive boardroom. The grand mahogany table stretching 20 feet across the room was completely free of clutter. There were no fake psychiatric hold documents. There were no fraudulent quitclaim deeds. There were only heavily profitable legitimate contracts waiting for my authorization. Adrian Cole, my silver-haired corporate attorney, sat calmly in one of the plush leather chairs, reviewing a thick stack of newly finalized federal court filings. He did not look up from the paperwork as I took my seat at the head of the table. He simply turned the page, his gold pen gliding smoothly over the margins, to check off a series of highly complex legal stipulations. The legal strategy we used 6 months earlier had survived review by federal prosecutors, civil regulators, and the bankruptcy court. Darius spent weeks plotting to steal my company so he could auction commercial routes to an offshore crime syndicate. He thought he had seized the crown jewel when he forced through the transfer of Sterling Legacy Holdings. Cole closed his leather portfolio with a sharp, definitive snap. He confirmed that the court-appointed receiver had completed the first phase of the Legacy Holdings proceeding and that no operating asset of Sterling Freight had been drawn into it. The fatal blind spot in his calculation was that he never understood the corporate architecture. The entity he claimed was a defensive holding company containing the residence Riverbend Industrial and several dormant assets. It did not own the trucks, the customer contracts, the dispatch operation, or the profitable warehouses. The real logistics empire had been protected for years inside the Sterling Family Enterprise Trust. Charles and I created that structure to shield employees and customers from risks connected to isolated real estate. Darius had not robbed an empty house, but he had seized the wrong house. He acquired assets under federal review and none of the operating authority he needed. Cole slid the final court disposition across the mahogany table. The document detailed the total destruction of the man who had tried to erase my existence. Darius had entered a guilty plea after prosecutors presented the device records, offshore transfers, recorded threats, and fraudulent contracts. He received 15 years in federal prison followed by supervised release. Federal law offered no ordinary parole. He lost the velvet suits, the leased cars, and the public image that had mattered more to him than character. Restitution and forfeiture orders followed him into prison. A portion of every dollar he earned would be collected, but no prison wage could satisfy the damage he created. The civil environmental proceeding continued separately through a court-appointed receiver. I signed the acknowledgement receipt, handing the document back to Cole. I did not feel a shred of pity for the man sweating in a federal laundry room. I asked my attorney for the final update regarding my biological daughter. Cole adjusted his glasses, pulling a secondary, much thinner file from his briefcase. He maintained a strictly professional tone, completely devoid of judgment, as he laid out the cold, hard facts of Chloe's current reality. When agents raided this ballroom, the illusion of Chloe's luxurious life collapsed. She filed for divorce the next morning, hoping distance from Darius would protect her. It did not erase the messages showing that she helped freeze my accounts, supported the false incapacity story, and participated in the attempt to control my assets. The government seized property purchased with traceable criminal proceeds, and the bankruptcy court examined every account connected to the marriage. Her condominium and vehicles were sold. She did not retain the lifestyle she had protected at the expense of her own mother. Chloe was completely stripped of her elite social status. The wealthy country club friends she had performed for during my orchestrated public humiliation completely abandoned her. The moment her credit cards declined and the federal indictments hit the local news, her elite social circle severed all ties. She was entirely excommunicated from the high society life she had betrayed her own mother to maintain. Cole told me Chloe lived in a small one-bedroom apartment outside the city. She sold designer handbags and shoes to pay legal expenses. By cooperating and admitting her role, she avoided prison, but received probation, community service, financial counseling, and restitution obligations. She worked overnight stocking shifts at a 24-hour retail store. The woman who once sipped $200 wine while Darius ordered me from my home now spent nights breaking down cardboard and lifting crates beneath fluorescent lights. I did not celebrate the contrast. Work was not humiliation. Honest work was the first solid thing she had chosen in years. I accepted the facts quietly. Chloe wrote to me every month. The first letter blamed Darius. The second blamed fear. The third described her own decisions without excuses. I had not resumed contact, but I kept that third letter. Forgiveness was not an emergency service I owed on demand. Accountability had to last longer than desperation. The heavy oak doors of the executive boardroom swung open, interrupting the quiet legal briefing. Tariq walked into the room. He did not look like the anxious college student who had covertly slipped a thumb drive into my coat pocket in the freezing dark. He did not look like a young man hiding in the shadows. He looked like the absolute future of the sterling logistics empire. My grandson wore a sharp navy suit, but he was still finishing his degree at Morehouse. During the previous 6 months, he rotated through dispatch safety finance and warehouse operations. I refused to hand him authority simply because he had helped save me. Every department manager evaluated him like any other candidate, and he earned their respect anyway. Tariq approached the long mahogany table, moving with the confident, deliberate stride of a seasoned corporate leader. He carried a thick, leather-bound portfolio in his left hand. He bypassed the empty chairs and walked directly to my position at the head of the table. He placed the portfolio on the polished wood and slid it smoothly across the surface. The heavy document came to a rest directly in front of me. The new routing software project, Tariq, led reduced empty miles and diesel consumption while protecting driver schedules. We secured 3 national grocery contracts and improved on-time delivery. The profit margins were strong, but the employee retention numbers pleased me most. Tariq understood that algorithms did not drive trucks, people did. I opened the leather portfolio, studying the flawless spreadsheets and the soaring revenue graphs. The numbers were absolute perfection. Tariq had not just saved his grandmother from a fraudulent psychiatric ward and a hostile corporate takeover. He had actively stepped onto the battlefield, protected our legacy, and immediately began expanding the empire. I looked up from the quarterly report, meeting my grandson's eyes. I saw the sharp, brilliant mind of a young man who understood loyalty, integrity, and hard work. I closed the portfolio and placed my hands flat on the table. "Excellent work, Director of Systems Strategy," I said, using the title the board had approved that morning. A proud smile spreads across his face. It was not the smile of someone receiving a crown. It was the smile of a young man being trusted with the next piece of responsibility. Cole gathered his files and left us to the afternoon schedule. Tariq sat to my right and opened his laptop. The business of moving freight never stopped, and neither of us wanted it to depend on family mythology again. The crisis also changed how I governed the company. No transfer involving a family entity could be signed without 2 independent legal reviews and a plain language summary attached to the first page. Senior executives were required to disclose when fatigue, illness, or personal pressure affected a major decision. Emergency access to company systems now required approval from separate officers, so no charming relative could collect power one password at a time. I created those rules, knowing they would apply to me as strictly as anyone else. Experience did not make me immune to error. It made me responsible for building a system that did not depend on my perfection. Tariq helped design the new controls, but I made certain he could not bypass them alone. He understood the reason immediately. Trust was strongest when it did not require blindness. A healthy family business should survive disagreement, grief, aging, and even betrayal without asking one person to become invulnerable. That lesson cost me a house-a-daughter relationship and several nights when I wondered whether love had made me foolish. I intended to make the cost useful. I pushed my chair back and stood up, walking slowly toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The morning sun was climbing higher into the sky, burning away the last remnants of the autumn fog. The sprawling, glittering skyline of Atlanta stretched out before me, a vast landscape of glass, steel, and endless opportunity. I looked down at Atlanta and thought about the night in the mansion, the jackhammers in the cellar, and the false medical form that almost removed my freedom. I also thought about the brass keys I had dropped into Darius' champagne. They no longer opened the Buckhead house. The receiver sold that property after repairs, and I chose not to bid for it. Before the sale, I removed Charles' Root notebooks, our wedding photographs, and the original keys. I framed the keys beside a photograph of our first truck. The house was eventually purchased by a foundation that planned to use it for temporary housing and job training for women rebuilding after financial abuse. A place Darius tried to use as a weapon would become shelter. People often say a mother's love should be unconditional. I believe love can be unconditional. Access is not. Trust is not. Control over another person's life is certainly not. The world expects mothers to absorb betrayal and call it loyalty. We are told to protect adult children from every consequence, even when those consequences are the only honest teachers left. Mercy without truth would only have financed the next betrayal. I pressed my hand against the cool glass and understood that I had not won because Darius went to prison or because Chloe lost her luxury life. I won because hundreds of employees kept their jobs and because no one succeeded in using my age as permission to erase me. I turned from the window and looked at the framed brass keys on the wall. I had recovered what mattered. The company was safe. The employees were paid. Tariq was building a future through work rather than entitlement. Chloe was finally living without the insulation of my money. Darius was answering to the law, and I was still standing at the head of my own life. After Cole left, I opened the third letter from Chloe again. The paper had been folded so many times that the center crease had begun to soften. She did not ask for money. She did not ask me to call the judge or speak to her probation officer. She described the country club in precise detail. She wrote that she had practiced the words about my memory in the car, while Darius corrected her tone. She admitted that she saw the fear in my face before I revealed the titanium card, and felt relieved because she thought fear meant I would surrender. The sentence was difficult to read because it was honest. Chloe also wrote about the night shift. An older coworker had shown her how to lift heavy cartons without injuring her back. The woman packed a second sandwich for her when she learned Chloe was skipping meals to pay restitution. Chloe wrote that kindness from a stranger felt different when she could not repay it with status. She ended with one line, "I understand now that I did not lose everything when Darius was arrested. I lost you when I decided your fear was useful." I folded the letter and returned it to the drawer. I was not ready to answer. An honest letter was a beginning, not a repair. But for the first time, I believed Chloe might be speaking to me rather than negotiating with me. That possibility was enough for one day. Later that afternoon, Tariq asked whether I wished I had stopped Darius before he filed the transfer. Every day I told him. Then I remember that stopping one filing would not have removed the greed. It would only have hidden it until the next opportunity. Could Mom have changed before the arrests, he asked. Yes, She had an exit in the living room, another at the country club, another when she learned about the doctor. She was offered many moments to choose differently. Consequences arrived only after she refused all of them. Tariq nodded but did not look comforted. I did not expect him to be. Healing was not the same as proving who was right. I touched the frame holding the old brass keys. Charles and I had built sterling freight by checking every load, every contract, and every promise. The one time I failed to read carefully, I nearly lost my home and my liberty. I would carry that lesson without pretending the betrayal was entirely my fault. Trust made me vulnerable. Their choices made them guilty. Family loyalty cannot mean allowing the people closest to you to erase your dignity. Sometimes protection looks like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like a boundary. And sometimes when a person hands you a shovel and expects you to dig your own grave, the strongest thing you can do is step aside and let them reveal what they intended to bury. Tell me what you would have done in my place. Would you have saved Chloe from the consequences or let the truth stand exactly as it was?